"You can't run a farm next to our homes." That's the first thing Karen, the self-crowned HOA queen, screamed across my fence line. I'd survived IEDs, night raids, and 22 years in the army, but nothing prepared me for a suburban tyrant with a clipboard. She called my tractor a threat, sent drones to spy on my fields, and plastered my name in HOA newsletters like I was public enemy #1. I tried to ignore her, but Karen wasn't the type to stop. One morning, her Lexus came screaming down the gravel road and smashed straight into my tractor. She dialed 911, wailing that I'd attacked her. What she didn't know was that every second, the crash, the lies, the rocks she hurled through my windshield was caught on my hidden cameras. And once that truth came out, it was Karen's world that started to collapse. Before we get into the story, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? My name is Daniel Mercer. After 22 years in the Army, most of them overseas, I came home to rebuild what was left of my father's farm. The house was modest, the barn older than I was, and the tractor rusty but still standing. I didn't return to be anyone's neighbor. I came back to take care of my land, to plant rows of corn that could whisper in the wind the way they did when I was a boy. But the world had changed while I was gone. Stone Creek Estates had risen like a fortress of beige stucco right against my fence line. A developer's dream turned into a homeowners association nightmare, and Karen stood at the center of it all. The first time I met her, she was on my porch before sunrise. Clipboard in one hand, sunglasses perched high like a crown. "You're new here," she said, as if I were a tenant who owed her rent. I told her plainly this land was mine, passed down 3 generations, and no HOA jurisdiction touched it. Her smile twitched, but she left with a warning. "What happens on your property affects our community." At first I thought it was just noise, another neighbor puffing up with imagined authority. But then came the notices. Neatly typed letters slid under my door, claiming my equipment was a visual nuisance, citing codes that applied only to their subdivision. I tossed them in the trash. Then came the drone buzzing low over my barn, snapping photos that later appeared in their digital newsletter under the caption, "New neighbor raises safety concerns." I knew exactly who was behind it. Still, I kept my head down. I repaired fence posts, fixed irrigation lines, and spent weeks coaxing life back into my father's old tractor, a faded Massey Ferguson that smelled like diesel in memory. When the engine finally coughed to life, I felt closer to him than I had in years. Karen, however, saw only a violation. Every time that tractor moved, she was there snapping photos from her Lexus, clutching her little dog as if the sight of corn dust might kill her. Harvest season was the breaking point. I woke before dawn, poured black coffee into a thermos, and steered the tractor into the golden rows. The sun climbed, the engine roared, and the field shook with life. That's when I saw her, Karen, perched on a garden stool at the edge of her lawn-red tracksuit, blazing like a warning flare. She filmed me, gestured wildly, shouted about the dust coating her patio furniture. I shut the tractor off long enough to wipe my brow and remind her this is farmland, always has been. She stormed off heels, clicking like gunfire, but her eyes promised something bigger. I should have known she wouldn't stop at words. Within a week, I found a sign planted near the walking trail. "Caution, dangerous farm machinery ahead. Report concerns to Stone Creek HOA." Her number was printed in bold. I took pictures, time-stamped them, and started a folder on my computer labeled HOA nonsense. The county zoning officer laughed when I showed him the complaints. "She files something every week," he said. "Umbrellas, mailboxes, now corn." But Karen wasn't laughing. She escalated. Broken twigs and lawn clippings dumped over my fence. Spray-painted words scrawled across the wood. "Keep it quiet." That's when I installed cameras. One above the barn, one at the east gate, another hidden in a hollow fence post. High-resolution motion activated. If she crossed a line, I'd know. Angela Booker, a deputy sheriff I'd once served alongside, pulled me aside at the hardware store. "Be careful," she said. "Karen's got friends on the zoning board. She likes to play dirty, document everything." I told her I already was. What I didn't say was that my gut, the same instinct that once kept me alive overseas, told me Karen was preparing a bigger move. I wasn't wrong. Saturday morning, the engine had barely warmed when I heard it, the roar of tires on gravel. Her Lexus tore down the easement road too fast, too close. Before I could react, she slammed into the tractor's front quarter panel. Metal crunched, dust flew, and she stumbled out screaming. "He attacked me. He tried to kill me with this machine." She dialed 911 right there, voice trembling with manufactured fear. I stood silent, arms crossed, watching. Because while she was performing her scene, camera 3 tucked in that fence post was recording every second the speed of her car. The impact. The rock she hurled at my windshield afterwards, spider-webbing the glass. She thought she'd staged the perfect ambush. What she didn't know was that her act was already collapsing under the weight of evidence. 10 minutes later, a squad car pulled up. Officer Cordell, a kid I'd once coached in Little League, stepped out. He listened as Karen wailed about being ambushed by farm equipment. He didn't nod. He didn't even blink. Instead, he turned to me. "You got cameras?" he asked quietly. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket, time-stamped airtight. He slipped it into his uniform, gave a single nod, and walked back to her. Karen's smile faltered when she realized I wasn't the one in handcuffs. For the first time, her voice cracked. "What do you mean, footage?" she stammered. But Cordell didn't answer. He just said, "We'll review it at the station." That night, I leaned against the dented tractor listening to the cicadas hum across the fields. I'd come home for peace, but peace doesn't come cheap. Sometimes it takes roots, sometimes it takes scars, and sometimes it takes showing the world that the truth has deeper roots than any HOA's rules. Karen wasn't the type to retreat after a single failed strike. If anything, her rage seemed to double after Officer Cordell walked away with my flash drive instead of my wrists in handcuffs. By the next morning, her war shifted into a campaign of attrition, death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one delivered under the banner of community standards. It started with anonymous complaints to the county. 2 inspectors in khaki shirts showed up at my gate, clipboards in hand, citing concerns about improperly stored fuel. I kept my tone calm as I led them into the barn. They're stacked neatly on concrete pads, were diesel drums sealed, and contained safety logs laminated and clipped to the wall. The inspectors exchanged looks, half amusement, half irritation. "This is cleaner than most municipal yards," one muttered, signing off my paperwork before heading back down the gravel road. Strike 1. 3 days later, a fresh notice appeared on my mailbox, this time a cease and desist order drafted on Stone Creek HOA letterhead, demanding I suspend industrial farming operations within visual range of community residences. I didn't even bother to crumple it. I scanned it, dropped the PDF into my growing HOA nonsense folder, and let the paper flutter into the burn barrel behind the barn. Strike 2. Then came the vandalism. Black spray paint across my eastern fence line, the words sloppy but legible, "Keep it quiet." I didn't shout, didn't knock on Karen's door. Instead, I repainted the slats before noon and added a second camera overlooking the trail. Every move she made was now another entry in my file, another thread in the rope she was weaving around her own neck. By the end of the week, she escalated again. One evening, while I was tightening bolts on the tractor's hydraulic arm, her Lexus crept to the edge of my drive. She leaned halfway out the window with her phone raised, snapping pictures like a paparazzo. This time, I didn't just wave. I pointed directly at the small black lens tucked under the barn's overhang. She froze, eyes narrowing before slamming the car into gear and speeding off. She had no idea I'd just recorded her trespass in crystal clear detail. Strike 3. Still, I knew these skirmishes weren't her endgame. Karen was the kind of person who fed on escalation. When whispers and vandalism failed, she looked for allies. That's when I ran into Deputy Angela Booker again, this time at the hardware store checkout line. We'd served in different branches but bled in the same desert years ago. "She's tightening the net," Angela warned, voice low. "Got friends on the zoning board, people who owe her favors. Don't just defend, document everything." I nodded. "Already ahead of you." Because while Karen obsessed over dust on her patio furniture, I'd spent late nights combing through public records at the county clerk's office. There, tucked between zoning plats and subdivision filings, I found something explosive. Stone Creek's original development application. It included a conditional easement agreement, one that was never finalized, meaning the HOA had no legal authority over the gravel access road where Karen claimed I'd abandoned my tractor. She'd rammed her Lexus into a legally parked vehicle on a road she didn't control. I printed copies, sealed them in a manila envelope, and left one with my lawyer, Jeff Carson, a high school friend turned land use attorney. His voice crackled over the phone when he saw the documents. "Dan, she's hanging herself. Give her a little more rope." Meanwhile, the neighborhood tension thickened. Parents hurried children indoors when I started the tractor. Joggers avoided my side of the path. One night, someone egged my mailbox. I didn't retaliate. I fixed it, logged the time, and added photos to the folder. Evidence, not emotion, that was my weapon. Harvest season rolled on each row of corn, cut down like a defiant heartbeat against the HOA's campaign. And yet the closer I got to finishing, the more erratic Karen became. One morning, I found lawn clippings dumped deliberately across the property line. Another night, the east gate, always padlocked, was left ajar. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, just a silent reminder we were here. I responded the only way I knew how. I mounted a third camera hidden inside a hollow fence post with a perfect angle on the gate. Between that and the others, I had a 3-point net covering every vulnerable approach. If she so much as brushed against my property again, I'd have proof airtight enough to hang in a courtroom. But Karen wasn't satisfied with shadows. She craved spectacle. And one Saturday morning she got it. The engine had barely warmed when I caught her at her second-story window, arms crossed, face pale against the glass. She wasn't filming, not shouting, just watching, waiting. I cleared 2 rows before the quiet snapped like a tripwire. A roar of tires tore down the easement road. Her Lexus again faster this time. I saw her eyes wild fixed before the impact jolted through the tractor. Metal crunched gravel, scattered, and her car bounced back, hood crumpled like paper. She stumbled out, phone already in hand. "Officers, I've been attacked," she screamed, stabbing at her screen as if dialing faster would make the lie true. Then she did the one thing I'd been waiting for. She grabbed a rock and hurled it through my windshield. Glass spider-webbed sun flashing across the cracks. And all of it, every reckless second, was caught on camera 3. The sound of shattered glass still rang in my ears when I noticed the flashing lights cresting the hill. Karen had wasted no time in dialing 911, her voice shrill enough to rattle the dispatcher. Within 10 minutes, a county patrol car rolled down the gravel road, crunching to a stop just beyond the wreck. Karen's Lexus sat at an ugly angle, its hood crumpled, steam rising in weak spirals. My tractor, dented but still standing, loomed like an unmovable witness. Karen rushed to the officer before he'd even shut his door. She clutched her little dog in one arm and waved wildly with the other. "He tried to kill me with that machine," she shrieked, pointing at me as if I were brandishing a weapon instead of standing calmly with my arms crossed. "He parked it deliberately in the middle of the road. He's been harassing me for weeks. Arrest him." The officer was James Cordell, a young man I knew well. I'd coached him in Little League years ago before the Army pulled me away. He was older now, uniform, sharp eyes, steady. He didn't nod to Karen's accusations. He didn't even glance at me at first. He just studied the scene, the skewed Lexus, the fractured tractor windshield, the gravel road that clearly branched from my property line. "Mr. Mercer," he finally said, walking over. "Everything all right here, I'm fine," I replied. "Tractor's not happy, though. She claims you left it in the middle of the road to cause this collision." I shook my head slowly. I pulled it off to the side while checking irrigation valves. Same thing I've done every morning. She came barreling down at 40 miles an hour and rammed into it. Then she threw a rock through the windshield. Karen screeched from behind him. "Lies. He's dangerous. He's been threatening me, endangering children, destroying the peace of our neighborhood." Cordell raised one hand for silence, but his eyes never left mine. "Do you have proof?" That was the moment I'd been waiting for. I reached into my pocket and held out a small flash drive labeled with a date and timestamp. "Camera 3, I said. "Covers the entire east gate. You'll see her accelerate, collide, then vandalize the tractor. Audio included." For the first time that morning, Cordell's lips twitched into the ghost of a smile. He slipped the drive into his breast pocket. "Understood." Karen's confidence cracked. "What do you mean, footage? He's lying. He doesn't have cameras." But Cordell didn't answer. He only turned back toward his cruiser. "We'll review everything at the station before making a report." Karen sputtered, demanding a supervisor, demanding immediate arrest. She was so wrapped up in her tantrum she didn't notice me leaning casually against the tractor, calm as stone. For once, the balance of power had shifted. When Cordell drove away with the evidence, Karen was left standing in the gravel, cheeks flushed red, shouting promises of lawsuits and board action. I said nothing. There was no point. Truth doesn't shout, it waits. That evening, Jeff Carson, my lawyer, called. I emailed him a copy of the footage. He whistled low through the receiver. "Dan, she just handed you everything. False report, property damage, vandalism, you've got her boxed in." "I don't want war," I said, exhaustion threading through my voice. Too late. She declared it the second she dialed 911. "Question is, do you want to end it fast or let her twist in the wind?" I stared at the cracked windshield, the spiderweb pattern catching the fading sunlight. "Let her twist. I want the truth to come out on its own." The following days were a study in silence. Karen didn't storm my fence. No new letters appeared on my mailbox. For almost a week, it felt like the storm had passed. But I'd learned overseas that silence wasn't peace, it was preparation. Sure enough, the next strike came not from Karen directly, but from her allies. 2 men from city code enforcement appeared at my gate with grim expressions. "Anonymous complaint," one explained. "Improper storage of chemicals, possible groundwater contamination." I almost laughed. You want to see my logs? They followed me to the barn where I showed them sealed drums, concrete containment barriers, and safety documentation I'd kept meticulously. One of them actually chuckled. "Wish half our sites looked like this," he muttered before signing off the inspection. Later that afternoon, as I tightened bolts on the tractor's fender, I noticed fresh spray paint scrawled across the outer fence again, "You don't belong." My fists clenched, but I forced them to unclench. Anger wouldn't serve me, evidence would. I repainted the boards, installed another hidden camera, and logged the incident. Each act of vandalism was another nail in the coffin of Karen's credibility. But Karen wasn't content with shadows and whispers. She wanted spectacle. She wanted to make me the villain, not just to the HOA board, but to the entire neighborhood. That was her fatal mistake. By the end of the week, a flyer appeared on the HOA bulletin board, "Community Safety Alert, Unregulated Machinery," adjacent to Willowberry Lane. Karen's number was printed in bold beneath. But this time, the backlash was immediate. Screenshots landed in my inbox, forwarded by sympathetic neighbors. One woman commented publicly, "Maybe we should stop harassing the only man out here growing food." Another wrote, "My kid loves watching his tractor. Leave him alone." The cracks were forming, and Karen didn't even realize she was the one widening them. That night, under the barn awning, I leaned against the scarred tractor and let the cicadas sing. I thought about my father, about the land he'd poured his sweat into, and about the absurdity of coming home from war only to fight a different kind of battle, one with HOA bylaws instead of bullets. Yet in some ways it felt the same. The enemy underestimated me. They thought intimidation could erase ownership. They forgot that I'd learned patience in places where patience meant survival. And now, armed with evidence, with cameras, with a folder thick enough to crush any fabricated claim, I knew the tide had finally turned. The question wasn't whether Karen would fall. The question was how loud the crash would be when her empire of control finally collapsed. By the time autumn's first chill crept across the fields, Karen had shifted from a loud enemy to something far more dangerous, a desperate one. Desperation doesn't knock politely. It slips through cracks, whispers in ears, and spreads like weeds through a neighborhood that once pretended to be paradise. I felt it in the silence of the cul-de-sac. Neighbors who used to wave while jogging past my fence now averted their eyes. Children who once stopped to watch the tractor chug along were suddenly tugged back by nervous parents. Karen had seeded fear, and fear grows faster than corn. But underneath that fear, I sensed something else: doubt. People were beginning to wonder whether their queen had led them into a war they didn't sign up for. The war, however, was far from over. One Tuesday morning, a pair of inspectors from the county zoning office showed up unannounced. Clipboards in hand, they explained that a complaint had been filed about illegal fuel storage and improper irrigation runoff contaminating community land. I kept my composure. "You'd better see for yourselves," I told them. I led them into the barn, showing neatly sealed diesel drums strapped down on concrete pads, each logged with dates and safety checks. I opened a locked cabinet with laminated inspection sheets, my initials signed at the bottom of every page. The inspectors exchanged a look, half impressed, half exasperated. "You run this cleaner than most city departments," one muttered. 10 minutes later they left, shaking their heads at the wasted time. I logged it all, time, date, names. Another piece of Karen's pattern. Another document for the folder I called HOA Nonsense. The next morning, spray paint again scarred my east fence. The words this time, "Farm rat, get out." My knuckles whitened around the paint roller, but I didn't let the anger win. I painted over it before noon, mounted another camera angled down the fence line, and kept the footage cataloged. Evidence, not emotion, that was my shield. But the most telling shift came from Karen herself. Instead of lurking on her balcony with her phone, she began staging spectacles. One afternoon, she marched along the trail in her blazing red tracksuit, clutching her clipboard like a sword, and handed out flyers, warning about hazardous farm machinery, threatening neighborhood safety. She even staked a sign at the trailhead, "Caution, danger ahead. Report to HOA President Karen." She didn't realize she was handing me ammunition. I photographed every flyer, every sign, every smug smirk on her face as she posed for pictures with neighbors. That night, I added them all to my growing archive. The folder was no longer just insurance, it was a weapon waiting for its moment. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut. Overseas, I'd learned to recognize when the air shifted before an ambush. Karen wasn't satisfied with notices and flyers. She wanted escalation. And escalation meant she would eventually step across the line into something irreversible. That line came into view during the harvest's final week. Saturday morning, the tractor engine roared alive, its rumble echoing against the barn as dawn painted the fields in gold. I steered toward the rows, breathing in the mix of diesel dust and memory. That's when I spotted her Lexus at the edge of the easement, idling like a predator in tall grass. My cameras blinked red, recording. She floored it. The car tore across the gravel, closing the distance fast. I barely had time to slam the brakes before her bumper crunched into the tractor's steel quarter panel. The jolt rattled my bones, dust billowing into the morning air. Karen stumbled out, phone in one hand, voice shrill enough to pierce the rumble of the engine. "He tried to kill me," she screamed into her phone. "He left this death machine in the road to ambush me. Officers, send help. He's a danger to this entire community." And then she made the mistake that sealed her fate. With one furious swing, she hurled a rock straight through the tractor's windshield. The glass cracked into a perfect spiderweb. Sunlight flared across the fracture lines like fireworks. I didn't shout. I didn't move. I simply looked up straight into the lens of camera 3. When the patrol car arrived, sirens cutting through the dust, Karen rushed toward Officer Cordell like he was her cavalry. She was in full performance mode, trembling voice, crocodile tears, dramatic gestures. "He ambushed me, officer. Look what he did to my car." Cordell didn't buy it. He turned to me. "Got cameras." 3, I said. "All angles. Collision, vandalism, even the 911 call." I pulled the flash drive from my pocket. Time-stamped, unedited, full metadata. Cordell slid it into his breast pocket, gave a small nod, and walked back to Karen. She froze as the realization hit her. "What do you mean? Footage? He's lying. There's no footage." But Cordell didn't flinch. "We'll review everything before making a report, ma'am." Her tantrum turned desperate. She demanded a supervisor, screamed about conspiracies, shouted that I was manipulating the system. But her words bounced off the steady hum of truth already locked in digital memory. By sunset, she'd retreated to her house, but not before stomping to the property line one last time. Her voice cracked across the fence. "You won't get away with this. I know people you'll regret crossing the HOA." I didn't respond. There was no need. For the first time since this war began, I felt the ground shift beneath her feet, not mine. That night, I sat under the barn awning with a thermos of coffee, staring at the dented tractor. The windshield bore its scar proudly, a reminder that sometimes you don't need to fight back with fists or fury. Sometimes all it takes is patience, cameras, and the quiet certainty that lies will eventually collapse under their own weight. And Karen's lies were already buckling. Karen didn't vanish after that collision. If anything, the wreck emboldened her, though. She tried to disguise desperation with bravado. To her mind, the Lexus incident was just another move in a game she believed she controlled. But what she didn't know was that I'd already shifted the board. She was playing HOA checkers. I was playing chess with evidence, law, and patience. The day after Officer Cordell left with my flash drive, I received an email from Karen herself. It bore the subject line, "Urgent Community Concern." The letter inside was written like a declaration of war. She demanded I cease all agricultural operations until further review by the Stone Creek Estates HOA. She accused me of creating a health hazard with diesel fumes, of poisoning neighborhood children with corn dust, of lowering property values with the unsightly presence of outdated machinery. She even cited bylaws that didn't apply to my land. I laughed out loud. It was the kind of laugh that comes not from humor but disbelief, that someone could be so arrogant, so blind as to think a typed letter could erase generations of ownership. I forwarded it directly to Jeff Carson, my lawyer. His reply came within the hour. "She's digging her own grave. Save everything." But the paper war wasn't enough for Karen. She thrived on spectacle, on public theater. The following morning, a brand new sign sprouted along the HOA walking trail that bordered my field: "Caution, dangerous farm machinery. Children at risk. Report to HOA President Karen." Beneath it was her number, printed in bold. I didn't tear the sign down. I didn't even touch it. Instead, I photographed it from 3 angles, included a timestamp, and filed it neatly into the growing HOA nonsense folder on my desktop. That folder was thick enough now to earn its own zip code. 3 days later, the county zoning office knocked again, this time with complaints about groundwater contamination. 2 inspectors, different faces, same story. They looked tired before they even crossed the property line. One flipped through his booklet, reading verbatim from the anonymous complaint: "Unsealed fuel storage, improper drainage, potential contamination of residential land." I almost pitied them. Almost. "Gentlemen," I said, leading them to the barn, "you're welcome to take a look." I showed them sealed diesel drums strapped to reinforced concrete pads. I showed them runoff channels I'd built by hand, angled away from the residential line and filtered through gravel beds. I showed them safety logs, each page laminated against grease and weather, signed with dates stretching back months. The inspectors exchanged glances. One chuckled. This is cleaner than half the municipal sites we've seen. He signed his form, handed me a copy, and left with a weary shake of his head. Another strike for Karen. Still, the harassment wore thin. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I felt the weight of vigilance pressing against my shoulders. Each night I checked cameras, cataloged footage, updated logs. Each morning I scanned the fence line before starting the tractor. It was the same rhythm I'd learned in war zones: trust nothing, prepare for everything. Angela Booker showed up at the hardware store again, this time in plain clothes. She leaned against the counter as we waited in line for parts. Word at the station is she's pushing hard, Angela said quietly. Noise complaints, environmental hazards, even tried to call in a trespassing report last week. I raised an eyebrow. On my land, yeah, Angela said with a dry laugh. Didn't go far. Dispatcher flagged it the second she mentioned cornfields. But Dan, listen, she's got friends on the zoning board. She's not going to stop. You need to keep your guard up. I nodded. I've got footage. I've got logs. When she crosses the line again, it won't just be my word against hers. Angela tilted her head. Good, because she will cross it again. People like Karen don't settle for skirmishes. They go for the kill shot. Angela was right. The kill shot came sooner than expected. That Saturday, the dawn was crisp, the kind that painted the horizon in orange fire and settled dew across the stalks. I fired up the tractor, as always, the engine's growl echoing against the barn. Halfway down the eastern row, I saw it, Karen's Lexus parked crooked near the easement driver's door, already open. She wasn't filming this time. She was marching, phone clutched, like a weapon clipboard in the other hand. You are done, she screamed, her voice slicing through the roar of the tractor. This ends today. The HOA will file for an injunction, and I'll have you dragged out of here in handcuffs. I cut the engine, stepped down from the cab, and wiped sweat from my brow. Karen, this isn't your land. You've got no authority here. You think your little cameras will save you, she spat. You think a few documents will erase what you've done to this community. You're finished, Mercer. I'll bury you under lawsuits until you're begging to sell this dump. Her words bounced off me like pebbles against steel. I'd heard worse from warlords overseas. I just leaned against the tractor, calm as stone. Funny thing about lawsuits, I said. They require truth. And truth isn't on your side. Her face flushed crimson. She grabbed a handful of corn husks from the trailer bed and hurled them over the fence like a child throwing a tantrum. Trash, she shouted. That's all this is, trash, dragging down our property values. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. I just stared, quiet, steady, until her bravado faltered. For the first time I saw it, the crack in her armor. Fear. That afternoon I installed a reinforced steel gate across the easement road just beyond the HOA's jurisdiction line. I bolted a laminated sign to the center: private agricultural property, not subject to HOA regulation. Trespassers will be recorded. By evening, the HOA Facebook page lit up like wildfire. Karen posted a furious 3-paragraph rant accusing me of isolationism and aggression toward peaceful neighbors. But the comments surprised her. One neighbor wrote, "Maybe if we left the man alone, he'd leave us alone." Another added, "My kid waves at his tractor every morning. Stop turning this into a war." The tide was turning. And Karen, blinded by her own fury, couldn't see that her empire of fear was beginning to collapse from within. The night after I put up the steel gate, I half expected Karen to storm back with a hammer and a fresh can of spray paint. But instead, I got silence. The kind of silence that crawls under your skin and makes you wonder what's waiting around the bend. For 4 days, she kept her distance. No notes, no drones, no screaming across the fence line. At first, it felt like relief. But I'd learned in combat zones that silence wasn't peace, it was planning. And Karen was the type who planned her next move like a general circling her target. On the 5th morning, I found my answer. A folded flyer was taped to my mailbox. Across the top, in bold block letters, "Community Safety Alert." Below it was a photo of my tractor snapped from one of her earlier ambushes, coated in dust and sunlight. The caption read, "Unregulated machinery endangering families on Willowberry Lane." At the bottom, Karen's name, her number, and her title, President Stone Creek Estates HOA. I took a photo of the flyer before tossing it into the burn barrel. Then, just for good measure, I checked the HOA's digital newsletter. Sure enough, my tractor was plastered across the front page, framed like a mugshot, with lines about hazardous fumes and threats to property values. What Karen didn't expect was the pushback. Screenshots started hitting my inbox, neighbors forwarding me her rants with their own commentary attached. One wrote, "My son loves watching the tractor go by. Leave him alone." Another, "I'd rather smell diesel than Karen's backyard BBQ." The cracks were showing. For the first time, Karen's empire of fear wasn't uniting people, it was dividing them. Still, she doubled down. That Friday, a certified letter arrived at my door delivered by hand. The return address was from Bentley and Finch, LLP, a local law firm notorious for ambulance-chasing cases. The complaint inside accused me of emotional distress, harassment, and intentional interference with neighborhood harmony. In short, Karen was suing me. I read the letter twice, then set it down on the table. Suing me meant discovery. Discovery meant evidence. And evidence was the one battlefield where Karen couldn't hide. That evening, I called Jeff Carson. His laugh boomed through the receiver. "She's suing you for harassment. After ramming her Lexus into your tractor and vandalizing your property, Dan, she just lit her own funeral pyre." "I don't want a war." I repeated the same words I'd said weeks earlier. Jeff sighed. "You don't have a choice anymore. She dragged you into court. So we counter. Defamation, property damage, false reporting. And while we're at it, we'll subpoena the HOA's financials." I raised an eyebrow. "Financials, yeah. Every HOA has to keep records, dues, budgets, contracts. If she's running things like she runs her mouth, I guarantee there's skeletons in that closet." He was right. And I had just the proof to open the door. The following Monday, I drove into the county clerk's office and requested public access to Stone Creek's HOA filings. The clerk looked surprised, but handed over a stack of folders an inch thick. I carried them home like a soldier hauling classified intel. That night, under the dim light of my kitchen, I flipped through page after page. It didn't take long to spot the cracks. Karen had been president for 7 years longer than the bylaws allowed. There were no recorded elections, only board consensus scrawled in the margins of meeting minutes. The HOA had collected tens of thousands in dues, but there were no receipts for landscaping or maintenance. No contracts, no invoices, just vague line items labeled community beautification and administrative costs. Then I found the smoking gun. Each month, the HOA ledger showed a $500 payment to administrative oversight, signed in Karen's neat, looping handwriting. Payments that stretched back years. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Fraud. Embezzlement. Abuse of position. She hadn't just picked a fight with me. She'd built her throne on stolen money, and now I had the receipts to prove it. The next morning, I drafted a letter. 2 pages, single-spaced, no emotion, just facts. I detailed every incident, the notices, the drone, the vandalism, the false 911 call, the collision. I included photos, links to video evidence, copies of zoning documents, and snapshots of the HOA financial records. At the end, I attached one line: "The truth has deeper roots than any HOA bylaw." I printed 26 copies, one for every household in Stone Creek. Before dawn, I walked the looping sidewalks of their pristine cul-de-sacs, slipping letters under doormats and clipping them to mailboxes. My boots crunched against the pavement in the cool darkness, the sound steady, determined. By 8 a.m., the HOA Facebook group was ablaze. "Is this real? Karen paid her nephew with our dues. My husband's name is on this board consensus. He never signed anything. She said she had authority over the easement. Looks like she lied." And finally, from Karen herself, "This is a smear campaign by a hostile outsider. Do not be fooled by fabricated documents. Legal action is being taken." But her voice didn't carry the same weight anymore. For the first time, her neighbors weren't falling in line. They were questioning, whispering, turning against her. That evening, a quiet knock sounded on my door. 3 HOA board members stood on the porch, each holding a copy of my letter. The man in the middle, Glenn Thompson, cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, we need to talk." I poured them coffee, sat them at my kitchen table, and let them read through the evidence again. They looked pale, shaken. "We had no idea," Glenn admitted. "She never showed us financials. We trusted her." "You trusted the wrong person," I said evenly. "She threatened me, lied to the police, vandalized my property, and she told you she had authority she never had." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Glenn nodded. "We'll call an emergency meeting." That night, Karen's empire began to crumble. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening inside the Stone Creek clubhouse. I arrived early not because I wanted to, but because I had no interest in letting Karen control the stage. The clubhouse was one of those faux rustic buildings developers love to plant at the center of suburban subdivisions. Timber beams stained too dark, polished stone fireplace, no one ever used, and folding chairs arranged in neat rows. By 6 o'clock, those rows were full. Neighbors shuffled in with folded arms and wary eyes, some clutching copies of the packet I'd delivered days earlier. Karen was the last to arrive. She burst through the double doors in a crimson blazer heels clicking like gunfire on tile. Her sunglasses perched on top of her head even though the sun had already dipped behind the tree line. She carried a thick binder under her arm and an expression that mixed fury with false confidence. Glenn Thompson, the interim board chair, cleared his throat into a microphone. "We're here tonight to address ongoing disputes between Mr. Daniel Mercer and Miss Place, Karen Holbrook, former HOA president." He emphasized former and I caught the flicker of panic cross Karen's face. "Both parties have submitted documentation. Each will have time to speak. Then the board will deliberate." Karen shot to her feet before he even finished. She strutted to the front, slammed her binder onto the table, and launched into a tirade. "This man," she said, stabbing a manicured finger in my direction, "has terrorized our community. He runs unregulated industrial machinery within sight of our homes, endangering children and pets. He refuses to comply with basic standards of decency. He is hostile, aggressive, and dangerous. I've been forced to take legal action to protect Stone Creek from his reckless behavior." Her voice quivered in just the right places, polished like a campaign speech. She paced back and forth, rattling off accusations like bullets, noise violations, dust clouds, intimidation, harassment. She painted herself as a martyr, the lone guardian standing between order and chaos. When she finished, she folded her arms with a satisfied smirk, as if expecting applause. But the room was quiet. Too quiet. Glenn gestured toward me. "Mr. Mercer, your response." I stood slowly, no binder, no microphone, just a folder in my hand. I looked out across the faces, parents I'd waved to, joggers who'd passed my fence, kids who'd stared at my tractor with wide eyes. They weren't strangers. They were witnesses. "I moved back here after 22 years in the Army," I began. "I didn't come to cause trouble. I came to care for the land my father left me. Land that's zoned agricultural and has been for generations." I held up the deed stamped and signed. "I've never trespassed on HOA property. I've never threatened a neighbor. What I have done is harvest corn, repair fences, and rebuild the tractor my father left behind." I let the silence sit before continuing. "In return, I've been harassed, surveilled, lied about, and accused of crimes I didn't commit. But I didn't come here tonight to trade words. I came with proof." I set the folder on the table and pulled out photos. Karen's Lexus crumpled against my tractor, the rock she hurled through the windshield still embedded in spiderweb cracks. I showed screenshots of her flyers, her newsletters, her rants plastered across community boards. Then I handed Glenn a flash drive. 3 camera angles of the collision, the vandalism, and the false 911 call. Time-stamped, unedited, with metadata intact. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen's face drained of color. "And one more thing," I added. From my folder I produced the HOA's financial statements, the ones with missing invoices, forged signatures, and 7 years of self-appointed stipends. This isn't just about my tractor. This is about trust. This community trusted Karen to lead with honesty. Instead, she used your dues like her personal checkbook. I have copies of every page filed with the county clerk. These aren't my words. These are hers, written in her own hand. The murmurs grew louder. Someone whispered, "She paid her nephew." Another 7 years without an election. A woman in the front row shook her head in disbelief. Karen lunged forward, slamming her palm on the table. "Lies, all of it. He forged those documents. He's manipulating you, trying to destroy me." Glenn didn't flinch. "The documents came from the county clerk's office," he said firmly. "Public record." Karen's voice cracked. "This is a smear campaign. He's an outsider. He doesn't belong here." I met her eyes. "This land was mine before Stone Creek existed, and it will be mine long after you're gone." The room went still. For once, Karen had no comeback. By the end of the night, the board voted to remove her permanently. The bylaws allowed for immediate termination in cases of gross misconduct. Glenn announced it formally. Effective immediately, Karen Holbrook is stripped of all authority as president of the Stone Creek Estates HOA. Her scream echoed through the clubhouse like glass breaking. "You'll regret this, all of you. You don't know who you're dealing with." She stormed out, binder clutched to her chest heels, hammering against the floor. The slam of the door was her only applause. But I knew she wasn't finished. People like Karen didn't surrender, they regrouped. Sure enough, 2 days later, a new envelope landed in my mailbox. This one stamped with bold letters from her lawyers at Bentley and Finch. She was filing a civil lawsuit against me for defamation, harassment, and intentional interference with neighborhood harmony. I stood at the mailbox, letter in hand, and couldn't help but smile. She thought court would be her salvation. She thought dragging me in front of a judge would intimidate me. But what she didn't know was that court was the one battlefield I'd been preparing for all along. The courthouse smelled of dust and lemon polish, the kind of scent that clung to old halls where too many lies had already been spoken. Karen strutted in like it was her stage debut, red suit, pressed hair, lacquered stiff sunglasses perched atop her head, though the courtroom's fluorescent lights left no shadow. She sat at the plaintiff's table with two attorneys from Bentley and Finch, flipping through a binder with exaggerated confidence. Across the aisle, I sat beside Jeff Carson, calm hands folded on the table, my evidence already logged and ready. The judge was Reinhardt, a no-nonsense man with decades of experience. His face looked carved from granite, and his eyes cut through excuses like a plow through soft earth. He opened the session with Karen's attorneys, who wasted no time spinning their tale. They painted me as an unhinged veteran running industrial-grade machinery without regulation, terrorizing a peaceful community with diesel fumes and dust storms. They described Karen as a devoted community servant who'd been subjected to psychological trauma, harassment, and reputational harm. One of her lawyers even choked up while reading her statement of emotional distress, claiming she suffered sleepless nights, anxiety, and social ostracism caused by my presence. I sat still, letting every word hang in the air. When they finished, Judge Reinhardt leaned forward. "Mr. Mercer, your counsel may respond." Jeff stood. He didn't raise his voice, didn't pace the floor. He spoke with the same steady cadence he'd used since high school debate team, measured, precise, relentless. "Your Honor," Jeff began, "the plaintiff's claims are not only unfounded, they are demonstrably false. We have video evidence from 3 angles showing Miss Holbrook deliberately accelerating her vehicle into my client's tractor. We have footage of her throwing a rock through his windshield, immediately followed by a false 911 call, accusing him of attacking her. We have HOA financial records, public records, showing 7 years of misappropriated funds under her signature. We have letters, flyers, spray-painted fences, and witness statements from county inspectors and zoning officers who all dismissed her complaints as baseless. This is not harassment. This is not emotional distress. This is a calculated abuse of power." He paused, then set a flash drive on the clerk's desk. "Everything is time-stamped and authenticated. I invite the court to view it." The room fell silent as the footage played on the projector. First, Karen's Lexus barreling down the gravel road, slamming into my tractor with a crunch that made even the judge flinch. Then the rock hurled through the windshield shards, scattering in the Sunday. Finally, the audio, Karen's trembling voice on 911 claiming she'd been ambushed, even as the camera caught her standing by the wreck she caused. When the lights came back on, you could feel the shift in the room. Neighbors who'd filled the benches behind us whispered, eyes wide, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. Her lawyers shuffled papers, stalling, but nothing could erase what everyone had just seen. Judge Reinhardt adjusted his glasses. "Miss Holbrook, do you wish to respond to this evidence?" Karen leapt to her feet. "Those videos are manipulated. He's been editing, fabricating. This is a smear campaign against me. He doctored the documents. He's poisoning this whole neighborhood against me." The judge's gaze hardened. "These records came from the county clerk's office. Public filings. Are you claiming the county fabricated them as well?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Reinhardt nodded once. "Very well. The court finds the plaintiff's claims unsubstantiated. The civil suit is dismissed with prejudice." Karen staggered as if the words themselves were blows. But the judge wasn't finished. He turned his gaze toward me. "Mr. Mercer, your counterclaims," Jeff stood again. "Defamation, property damage, false reporting, and malicious prosecution. We request restitution for the tractor repair's attorney's fees and punitive damages for repeated harassment." The judge tapped his gavel, softly thoughtful. "I've reviewed the filings. The evidence is clear. Restitution is granted. Miss Holbrook is to pay damages and cover all legal costs. Furthermore, the HOA's financial records are hereby referred to the county auditor for investigation of potential misappropriation of funds." The gavel struck once sharp as a gunshot. Case closed. The sound echoed like liberation. Karen didn't look at me as she stormed out. Reporters crowded her on the courthouse steps, but she shoved past without a word, slamming the car door of her battered Lexus, the same one that still bore the dent from my tractor. Within a week, a for-sale sign sprouted on her lawn. No farewell party, no goodbye posts, just silence and an empty driveway. Stone Creek began to shift almost immediately. Glenn Thompson and 2 other board members resigned, replaced by neighbors who promised transparency. Financial audits revealed missing funds and restitution checks were mailed back to homeowners. The HOA, once Karen's kingdom, became something closer to what it should have been all along: ordinary people maintaining ordinary streets. Some neighbors stopped me at the fence line. They didn't apologize, not directly, but their gratitude was clear. A man I'd never spoken to pressed a tin of peanut brittle into my hands. Julie, the mother whose son loved the tractor, waved as she walked past with him, smiling shyly. Even Glenn, weary but relieved, asked if I'd be willing to consult on their new bylaws. I told him only one condition: don't knock on my door before 9 a.m. He laughed, and for the first time it didn't sound forced. But the best moment came one Sunday morning when a boy of about 10 pedaled his bike up to my gate. He wore a baseball cap too big for his head and clutched a small notebook. "My dad says you fought a war with a tractor," he said, eyes wide. I chuckled. "Something like that." "Can I see it?" he asked, pointing at the Massey Ferguson, its scarred fender glinting in the sunday. I nodded. "Only if you help me finish changing this bolt." He climbed up beside me, notebook tucked under his arm, and I handed him the wrench. Together we tightened steel and shared silence. Not the silence of fear or plotting, but the silence of peace earned the hard way. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about winning against Karen or exposing a corrupt HOA. It was about proving that truth, steady and patient, can outlast noise, lies, and intimidation. The harvest wasn't just in the field. It was in the quiet strength that remained when the storm finally passed. When I look back now, I don't remember the flyers, the vandalism, or even the courtroom as much as I remember the stillness after it was all over. There's a kind of peace you only earn by standing your ground, by refusing to let someone else write your story. Karen thought she could control a community with fear, but fear is shallow. Truth grows deeper roots. And that's the lesson I want to leave you with. Never let anyone bully you out of what's rightfully yours, whether it's land dignity or peace of mind. Stand firm, be patient, gather your evidence. In the end, even the loudest voices collapse under the weight of their own lies. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever faced down a bully of your own. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story of justice, resilience, and a little bit of sweet revenge.